Allez, donc bonjour, bienvenue. Aujourd'hui, c'est le mercredi 2 juin. Hop. OK. Donc voilà les objectifs. Bonjour. Voilà les objectifs. Hein. OK. Donc on va commencer avec un échauffement et puis on va revoir un peu le passé composé. On va s'entraîner un petit peu aussi. OK. Et puis sortir avec une copine. On va commencer ce travail qui sera la fin de l'année, la fin du semestre, la fin de l'année. OK. Donc, pour l'échauffement, si tu pouvais, donc imagine, si tu pouvais passer une semaine n'importe où dans le monde, si tu pouvais passer une semaine n'importe où dans le monde, mais, il fallait passer cette semaine dans la compagnie de tes parents et de tes frères et sœurs, où irais-tu? Où irais-tu? Donc, où irais-tu dans le monde? Est-ce que tu irais aux États-Unis, dans un État des États-Unis? Est-ce que tu irais dans un pays lointain? Est-ce que tu irais dans l'Afrique du Sud, dans le Madagascar? Est-ce que tu resterais dans les États-Unis? Où irais-tu? Ok, ouais. Donc j'irai au Mexique, j'irai en Finlande, en Italie. Il y a plusieurs personnes qui ont dit en Italie, à Venise, à Rome. J'irai à Fidji, la Nouvelle-Zélande, aux Maldives. Très bien. Donc les vacances, on s'approche des vacances. We're getting closer and closer to vacation. Ouais. Ok. Donc le passé composé. Donc révisons un petit peu. So in French, we use the passé composé to describe an action that had a clear start and end in the past. And again, I want to review this a little bit. This is all stuff that you've already seen, okay? This you haven't seen actually, but this is all stuff that I've already told you about the passé composé. I don't expect you to memorize this, but I want to kind of give you this information as kind of, again, planting the seed or laying the foundation for later. Okay, so next year in French 3, I hope to see you all in French 3. In French 3, we'll talk about the imparfait, and it can get a little confusing. It can get a little confusing, but if you manage to kind of remember, okay, the passé composé is a specific action in the past, started and ended the past, it makes your job a little bit easier, okay? So for example, last night I did not watch the Zack Snyder Justice League film, all right? So that is something I did not do. That's a specific, how long is the film? Does anybody know? 4 hours? Yeah, so that's a very specific, it's a long time, but it's a specific amount of time, right? So if somebody says they watched it, you're like, wow, you spent 4 hours. Okay, right? You know it's gonna be that amount of time. 2 years ago, Miss Punzel and I got married. So June 29th, okay? 2 years ago, specific day, right? Last week, I fell and chipped a tooth, right? So it doesn't have to be a sad thing or a happy thing or any kind of type of thing in particular, but it does have to be a specific time, right? And you'll notice, so those are the passé composé. You notice these things, right? We've been looking at some of these expressions. What are some of these expressions in French? Do y'all remember some of the ones that I kind of drew your attention to yesterday, and I've kind of been talking to you a little bit here and there? Some of these expressions in French where it's like a specific time in the past, where you're kind of starting the sentence with yesterday, or last summer, or a year ago. And these are expressions that come in handy because it's a specific time in the past. Yeah, so these are all expressions. Hier, il y a 2 ans, avant la pandémie, l'été dernier, etc. These are expressions that really trigger the passé composé. It's like, okay, boom, it's going to be a specific time in the past. Right? OK. Donc, par exemple, hier soir, je n'ai pas regardé la version Zack Snyder de Justice League. Il y a 2 ans, Madame Punzel et moi, nous nous sommes mariés. La semaine dernière, je suis tombé et je me suis fait la dent. Okay? So these are things that had a clear start and clear end in the past. OK. Donc maintenant, entourer le verbe auxiliaire dans ces phrases. So we've been working on auxiliary verbs, right? And 90% of the time, the auxiliary verb is going to be to have, or does anybody remember in French? 90% of the time, the auxiliary verb that kind of helps us get to the passé composé, it's going to be either to be or to have. And 90% of the time, it's going to be to have. Does anybody remember?
Avoir.
Avoir. Avoir. Yeah, so avoir. Sometimes it'll be être. Okay, 90% of the time it'll be avoir. And then sometimes it'll be être. Before we do this, can anybody identify an être in here? We've seen just avoir so far. But real quick, can anybody think of an example of in here of an être? There are two examples here, or three really. Yeah, I'm seeing some good answers in the chat. Yeah, oh cool, we've got some annotation. Yeah. Nous nous sommes mariés. We got married. Nous nous sommes mariés. That's what's called a pronominal verb or a reflexive verb. We married ourselves. We married each other, right? Okay. Nous nous sommes mariés. Je me suis fêlé la dent. I broke myself the tooth. Okay, same thing. It doesn't work so much in English, right? We just say I broke a tooth. But in French, you're going to use what's called a reflexive verb or a pronominal verb. Je me suis fêlé la dent. I broke myself the tooth. It's kind of strange, okay? But yeah, je me suis fêlé la dent, and then je suis tombé. So we won't look at these this year, but next year we'll look at these a little bit. This 10% of verbs that you do need être for. But for now, let's just look at avoir verbs. I'll go ahead and clear annotation. And what I'd love for you to do is to circle le verbe auxiliaire. Entourer le verbe auxiliaire dans ces phrases. Or you can put them in the chat if that's easier for you. Let's try to see if we can find it. Ouais, super. Bravo. Vous m'avez épaté. You guys totally took me by surprise. I love it. Yeah. Je n'ai pas regardé. Yeah, so this is the auxiliary verb, right? That lets us get to the passé composé. Nous avons voyagé. Tu as vu. Elles ont fait, right? So this is all that avoir that we've been practicing with the GIM kit, right? Excellent. Bravo. Bravo. And just to review, this is kind of how the auxiliary verb works in French, right? So boop, boop, boop. Good job, y'all. Got it. 100%. So in French, we've got kind of this pattern, right? Subject, verb, object. So the person doing the thing, the actor, the action, and then sometimes an object. So je vois, I see. You don't need an object. Je vois, I see, okay? Je vois le chat. I see, what is le chat? Neko-chan in Japanese. Gato in Spanish. Le chat. Yeah, cat. I see the cat. Okay, I see the cat. All right, really simple. Subject, verb, object. I see. What do I see? I see the cat. All right, so we've got the subject, je, so that's the person doing the thing, and the verb, voir. Okay, and then here, this isn't changing anything, but I just wanted to show you kind of this pattern, how it looks in the passé composé. So, je vois le chat. J'ai vu le chat. Okay, so the verb, it just becomes le passé composé. You've got avoir, and then the participe passé, right? You've got that helper verb, the auxiliary verb. Okay, le verbe auxiliaire. Right? So what I'd like you to do now is to go ahead and, for some reason it didn't work, but let me go ahead and, for those of you who have not finished it, please go ahead and take a moment. Now that we've kind of reviewed these things a little bit, please take a moment to complete En Vacances 205. Okay. Is that working? Are you able to see that? Yeah. En Vacances 205. Some of you have completed it, so good job, okay? 9 of you, so that's great. But there are still 2/3 that I'd love to see, okay? So what you're doing is you're using one of these expressions in each sentence 3 times, okay? So let me pause sharing and I'll show you an example. All right, so what I'd like to do now, so we've reviewed the verbe auxiliaire, okay? We've reviewed kind of how those work in the passé composé. What's the other part of the passé composé? So if we look at, so here we've got subject, verb, object. We've got the subject. We've got the verbe auxiliaire. What's this other part? What do we call this? It's okay if you don't remember, but this is a pretty important part, right? We call it un participe passé, okay? So like a past participle. It's okay if you don't remember that, all right? And again, we've got some kind of patterns going on here. So I wanted to review the patterns real quick, and then we could play a quick game. So écouter is going to become écouter. Regarder, jouer, they sound the same. These ones sound a little different. Finir is going to become fini. Choisir, choisi. Dormir, dormi. Vendre is going to become vendu. Répondre, répondu. Descendre, descendu. Right? So does anybody remember what this pattern is? ER. What are these ER verbs going to become for the participe passé? What are we going to do with them? How do we make the transition from this side to this side? Yeah, yeah. So take off the ER and go to ich, right? Yeah, yeah. Excellent. Okay. How about these ones? What's the pattern we're seeing with these? Yeah, that one's even simpler, right? Yeah. It goes from IR to I, right? So finir, fini. Choisir, choisi. This is one of the weirder ones. What about this one?
RE to U.
Yeah, RE goes to U, right? Yeah. Okay, entraînons-nous. All right. So good job, y'all. Put some good practice in. As we wrap it up for the day, we just practiced a little bit with the participe passé. Huh? Oop. Forgot that I made that a link. Okay. Okay, sortir avec une copine. Huh? So here, what I'd like us to do is I'd like you to open up your activity packet, which is already open, right? Because we talked about it before. And if you scroll all the way to the bottom, so we've got the Le lièvre et la tortue, so the story that we read, right? The quick story. And then here, what we're going to do, this is the end of the semester. This is the final activity for the semester, okay? So last night, you went out with a French-speaking friend, and this morning, you and her texted, okay? So first, check your messages and see how much you can understand what she's saying. Then start thinking of your response. So this is an activity in two parts, okay, in your activity packet. The first part is reading through her messages, right? And kind of interpreting them, trying to understand what she's saying. And then in the second part, you're gonna be crafting your own responses, right? You're gonna text her back. All right, so these are her texts. So I wrote these, so she does not exist, all right? So this is an imaginary person, right? And I put it in iMessage just to make it look a little bit familiar, right? So you're gonna use the clues that you have, right? You're gonna try to kind of understand what she's saying with the information you have, right? So you're gonna try to understand what she's saying. Just imagine like you're just checking your phone real quick, right? And you're just trying to understand what she's saying. You're gonna use the different clues to try to answer these questions, right? So what are some tools that we worked on? What are some skills that we worked on to become better detectives in the language? When you're looking at these messages, how are you gonna kind of put the puzzle pieces together? What are some strategies? Yeah, so we talked about how, okay, so this is a friend who's texting you. You can use the vocab you already know to kind of put the pieces together. So concert, you can kind of guess, okay, concert, maybe that's kind of similar to English, you don't know, right? Je me suis éclaté hier soir. Éclaté, you might not know, but hier, you might know, and soir, right? So you can kind of put those pieces together. But you have this additional piece of information, this additional tool, this additional clue to do that detective work of emojis, right? So you can use the emojis too to try to figure out, okay, maybe that's giving us clues to what she's trying to say, right? All right. So for tonight, what I'd like you to do is to start looking at these, all right? Read them through once. And if you are inspired, to start answering these questions, right? Start answering these questions in the yellow boxes in your own packet, all right? And then afterwards, we'll talk about writing your answer. And just so you know, boop, boop, boop. Once you've finished it, we'll review a little bit together, but I'll be asking y'all to finish it on your own. I'll be asking you to turn it in here, en vacances 6. Okay, so slides 14 through 19. I think that's the right number for slides. I never totally know. Sometimes it's a little off. But these slides, basically, right? So you can submit screen caps. All right. So for tonight, what I'd like you to do is to start looking at those, start trying to understand what she's saying. Maybe start answering some of those quick questions. Oh my goodness. This is what I get for putting links in the presentation. All right. Ok, donc pour demain, commencer, maybe not termine. I thought we might get a little bit further, we didn't. But so instead of finishing these questions, maybe start these questions, right? Or at least start reading it and trying to understand what she's saying. And then finally, I just wanted to check in real quick. Is it gonna advance? No. About the end of the year. So we've got this, and this is kind of our last activity. So this is what we're gonna be doing for the next few days, in addition to wrapping up the activities in the workbook, in your activity packet, okay? Whatever activities you have remaining. And this is also the time, these next few days, to kind of make up missing work. So again, we have this week through Friday, and then next week, Tuesday and Wednesday. All right. So I'm going to say au revoir to the recording.